Here's something that might surprise you. In 1970, 1 out of every 4 new Fords sold in Europe was a sleek, affordable coupe that most Americans had never heard of. The Ford Capri wasn't just selling well, it was rewriting the rules of what a sports coupe could be. If you were around in the late 60s, you remember what the original Mustang did to the American market. Ford expected to sell maybe 100,000 units. They sold over 400,000 in the first year alone. But here's what they don't tell you. Ford pulled off that trick twice. The second time was with the Capri, and in some ways, it was even more impressive. Europe in 1968 was a different world than America. Gas wasn't cheap. Roads were narrow and winding. The typical European buyer couldn't afford a big vape guzzler. They needed something nimble and economical, but they still wanted that emotional connection, that feeling of driving something special. The Capri, delivered by borrowing the Mustang's formula, take ordinary components, wrap them in extraordinary styling, and price it so the average working man could afford to dream. The Ford Capri story is about more than sales numbers. It's about a designer who died tragically young, months before his creation debuted. It's about racing victories over BMW. It's about a car so beloved in Britain that they kept building it 2 extra years after Europe had moved on. And yes, it's about how this European coupe actually outsold the Mustang in certain markets. Let's explore 13 facts about the Capri that reveal why this car deserves far more recognition. Fact 1. The designer never lived to see his masterpiece succeed. The man behind both the Mustang and the Capri was Philip T. Clark, an American designer whose story reads like something from a film. Born in Iowa in 1935, Clark joined Ford in April of 1962 after a brief stint at General Motors. He was only 27 years old, but he already had a clear vision for what a sports car should be. Clark worked on the original Mustang design team, and according to period sources, he created the mid-engine Mustang 1 concept car and designed the famous running horse emblem, the one that still gallops on Mustangs today. In 1964, Ford transferred him to their research and engineering center in Dunton, Essex, England, where he took on a leadership role in the European design team as chief exterior stylist. There, Clark began sketching what would become the Capri. His early designs emphasized a sleek fastback profile with a long hood and short rear deck, borrowing the proportions that made the Mustang so successful, but scaled down for European tastes and roads. He explored ideas like retractable headlights and integrated the mechanical components from the humble Ford Cortina platform. The tragic part? Philip T. Clark died in 1968 at just 32 years old from kidney failure. He never saw the Capri debut at the Brussels Motor Show in January of 1969. He never knew that his design would sell nearly 2 million units. He never witnessed the racing victories or the devoted following the car would inspire. The Capri became his posthumous masterpiece, and for years, his crucial role in its creation remained largely unknown to the public. Fact 2. It was nearly called the Colt, and that would have changed everything. During development, Ford planned to call their new European coupe the Colt. It made perfect sense, a young horse to complement the Mustang. There was just one problem. Mitsubishi had already trademarked the name since 1962. Ford fought Mitsubishi in court during the preliminary production run in late 1968. They lost. Forced to find a new name weeks before the car's public debut, Ford turned to Capri after the Italian island. They'd used it before on Lincoln models in the 50s and on the Ford Capri in the early 60s. Losing that court case might have been fortunate. Colt was derivative, always in the Mustang's shadow. Capri evoked Mediterranean elegance and European sophistication. The tagline, "The car you always promised yourself," worked perfectly with Capri in a way it never would have with Colt. Fact 3. The sales numbers were absolutely staggering. Let's talk about what really matters. Did people buy this car? The answer is yes, in numbers that Ford themselves found almost unbelievable. Production began in November of 1968 at the Halewood plant in Liverpool, 2 months before the official unveiling. Ford wanted to ensure every dealer in the UK had at least one Capri on the forecourt when sales started in February of 1969. They even parked examples at prominent locations. Major railway stations in southeast England became showcases for the new coupe. In 1969, Ford built 213,979 Capris. The following year, production climbed to 238,914 units. By the end of 1971, Ford had sold over 400,000 Capris in just 2 years. Think about that, 400,000 units of a brand new model in a market where 50,000 annual sales was considered successful. The Mark I Capri alone sold 1,172,900 units over its 5-year production, run from 1968 to 1973. By the time production finally ended in 1986, nearly 1.9 million Capris had been built across all 3 generations. To put that in perspective, that's more than many so-called successful sports cars sell in their entire production run. Fact 4. In North America, it became the second best-selling import. The Capri's success wasn't limited to Europe. When Ford began importing it to North America in April of 1970, exactly 6 years to the day after the Mustang's introduction, American buyers embraced it enthusiastically. Sold through Lincoln Mercury dealers and marketed simply as Capri without any Ford badging, it was promoted as the sexy European, with a starting price of $2,300. That was affordable enough to attract buyers who wanted something different from the increasingly large and heavy American pony cars. Sales in the United States were remarkable. In 1972 alone, over 90,000 Capris were sold in America. The following year, sales exceeded 113,000 units compared to just 59,000 Toyota Celicas and 135,000 Mustangs. At its peak, the Capri was the best-selling import in North America except for the Volkswagen Beetle. From 1970 through 1978, a total of 513,500 Capris were sold in the North American market. That's more than 500,000 units of a car most Americans today have never heard of. The Capri proved that American buyers weren't just interested in big V8s. They wanted driver engagement and European flair at an accessible price. Fact 5. The original price was remarkably affordable. When it launched in the UK in 1969, the base model, with a 1.3-litre engine, cost £890. The top spec 2000 GT XLR with its 93 horsepower Essex V4 was priced at £1,310. £890 in 1969 equals approximately £14,000 today. Ford had created a genuinely affordable sports coupe, a car that a young professional could realistically buy, not just dream about. This pricing wasn't accidental. The Capri borrowed heavily from existing Ford models. Mechanical components came from the Mark II Cortina. Taillights were shared with the Escort. The steering came from the Corsair. By raiding the parts bin, Ford kept the development budget to £20 million and ensured competitive pricing. This mirrored the Mustang strategy, which was based on the Falcon sedan. The formula worked: give buyers styling and emotion at a price where practical concerns couldn't override desire. Fact 6. The engine range was bewildering in a good way. Part of what made the Capri so successful was the staggering variety of engines on offer. Ford understood that different buyers had different needs and budgets, so they offered something for everyone. British-built Capris initially came with the Ford Kent straight-4 engine in 1.3 and 1.6-litre capacities. German-built models used the Ford Taunus V4 in 1.3, 1.5 and 1.7-litre displacements. At the top of the range sat the Essex V6 in 2-litre form for the UK market and the Cologne V6 in 2-litre form for Germany. By September of 1969, Ford had added the 3000 GT to the UK lineup, featuring a 3-litre Essex V6 producing 138 horsepower. Germany got the 2300 GT with a 2.3-litre Cologne V6, making 125 horsepower. This variety had a downside for those who wanted outright performance. Most Caprice left the factory with mundane power plants. The base 1.3-litre model took a glacial 23 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour and had a top speed of just 84 miles per hour. But that was the point. Ford sold excitement at every price point. You could buy a cheap Capri and still feel like you were driving something special, even if the performance didn't match the looks. Fact 7. The RS2 600 dominated European racing like nothing before it. While the standard Capris were selling in huge numbers, Ford's motorsport division in Cologne was creating something altogether more serious. The RS2 600, introduced in September of 1970, was designed specifically to dominate Group 2 touring car racing. The road-going RS2 600 used a 2.6-litre Cologne V6 engine with Kugelfischer mechanical fuel injection, producing 150 horsepower. But that was tame compared to the racing version. On the track, Ford's engineers bored out the engine to 3 litres and added dry sump lubrication. Combined with extensive use of fiberglass panels to reduce weight, a ZF 5-speed gearbox, and uprated suspension and brakes, the racing RS2 600 produced over 320 horsepower and weighed around 900 kilograms. The results were devastating. In 1971, German driver Dieter Glemser won the European Touring Car Championship, driving a factory-entered RS2 600. The Capri won 6 out of 8 races that season, sweeping aside the BMW 2800 CS, prepared by specialists like Alpina and Schnitzer. In 1972, the dominance continued. Ford won 8 out of 9 rounds in the European Touring Car Championship. Fellow German Jochen Mass, who would later enjoy a successful Formula One career, won the driver's title. The Capri RS2 600 also finished first and second in its class at the Le Mans 24-hour race that year. Only 3,532 RS2600S were built in total, including prototypes and homologation specials. Today, they're among the most valuable Capris, regularly selling for well over $200,000. Fact 8. The RS3100 carried the fight to BMW Motorsport. When BMW Motorsport was established in 1972 and began campaigning the 3.0 CSL Batmobile with its wild aerodynamic kit, Ford knew they needed to respond. The RS3100, introduced in late 1973, was their answer. The RS3100 used a 3.1-litre version of the Essex V6, stretched to allow the racing version to compete in the over 3-litre class. Only 250 RS3100S were built for homologation purposes at Ford's Halewood plant, making it even rarer than the RS2600. The most distinctive feature was the black rubber ducktail rear spoiler, added to provide high-speed stability. Combined with a chin spoiler up front, it gave the RS3100 the best drag coefficient of any Capri to date. Gold decals adorned the power bulge on the hood, the flanks, and the tail. While the RS3100 never quite matched the RS2600's complete dominance, BMW Motorsport was simply too well funded and organized. By that point, it remained competitive and showed that Ford wasn't willing to concede defeat. The RS3100 has become a legend in its own right, with surviving examples commanding astronomical prices at auction. Fact 9. In 1970, 1 in 4 European Fords was a Capri. Perhaps the most astounding statistic about the Capri's early success is this. In 1970, during the car's first full year of production, across all European markets. 1 out of every 4 new Ford vehicles sold in Europe was a Capri. Let that sink in. Ford was selling mainstream family sedans like the Cortina and Escort in huge numbers. They had commercial vehicles, estate cars, and various other models. Yet the Capri, a 2-door sports coupe with limited practicality, accounted for 25% of their total European sales. This extraordinary market penetration showed that Ford had tapped into something deep in the European psyche. The 1970s were a time of increasing prosperity, and a whole generation of buyers who'd grown up with austere post-war transportation now had the means to buy something that made their hearts race. The Capri was perfectly positioned to capitalize on this desire. The sales momentum continued throughout the 1970s, though it gradually declined as competition increased and economic conditions worsened. By 1976, the Capri was the 7th most sold car in the entire UK market, not just among Fords, but among all manufacturers. Fact 10. Production timing makes Clark's death even more tragic. The timing of Philip T. Clark's death makes the story even more heartbreaking. Clark died in early 1968, probably February or March, just as Ford was finalizing the Capri for production. Production began in November. The Brussels debut came in January 1969. He missed it all by less than a year. For years, Clark's role remained largely unknown. The Mustang overshadowed his other work, and his early death meant he couldn't advocate for his legacy. Today, knowledgeable enthusiasts see the Capri as a memorial to a designer whose exceptional talent was cut short far too soon. Fact 11. UK production continued 2 years after Europe stopped. When production of left-hand drive Mark III Capris ended in late 1984 for the European market, Ford kept building right-hand drive versions for the UK for another 2 years. The rest of Europe had moved on. Sales had declined since 1980 as hot hatchbacks became popular, but British buyers weren't ready to let go. The Capri had become a cultural icon in the UK in a way it hadn't elsewhere. Ford honoured this loyalty by continuing production at Cologne specifically for Britain. The final Capris were limited edition 280 models, nicknamed Brooklands, after the distinctive green they were painted. These featured a limited slip differential, full leather Recaro interior, and Pirelli P7 tyres. Originally, Ford planned to build 500 turbocharged Capri 500s, but production changes meant they built the last cars running down the line as 280s. A total of 1,038 were completed. The very last Capri was registered on November 20th, 1989, the only G registration Capri. Fact 12. The Capri Piranha took V8 power to extremes. While most Capris made do with 4-cylinder or V6 engines, one special variant took things to an entirely different level. In South Africa, specialist tuner Basil Green Motors offered a Capri conversion with Ford's 302 cubic inch Windsor V8 engine. Approximately 500 of these Capri Piranhas were built between 1970 and 1972. With the big V8 up front, the Piranha produced around 220 horsepower, substantially more than even the hottest RS models. The car became legendary in South African touring car racing, winning the championship in both 1970 and 1971. However, the Piranha highlighted a fundamental truth about the Capri's design. It was optimized for smaller, lighter engines. With the heavy V8 installed, the car became nose-heavy and lost the nimble handling that made the standard Capri so enjoyable on winding roads. It was fast in a straight line, certainly, but it sacrificed the balanced character that made the Capri special. Ford South Africa built standard Capris from 1970 to late 1972, using the same model range as the UK, with the Essex V6 as the most common engine since it was assembled locally. But the Piranha remains the most exotic and valuable of all South African Capris. Fact 13. The Capri actually outsold the Mustang in certain markets and years. Now we come to the most controversial claim. Did the Capri really outsell the Mustang? The answer is nuanced, but ultimately yes, in specific markets and specific years, the European Capri outsold the American Mustang. Let's look at the numbers. In 1973, Ford sold over 113,000 Capris in North America alone. That same year, total Mustang production for the US market was just under 135,000 units. When you add European Capri sales to the North American figures, the Capri's global sales that year significantly exceeded the Mustangs. In 1970, Ford built 238,000 Capris worldwide. Total US Mustang sales that year were just under 190,000. Again, the Capri wins. Now, to be fair, the Mustang's sales had declined significantly from its mid-60s peak, when annual sales exceeded 500,000 units. And if you look at lifetime totals, the Mustang's 10 million plus sales dwarf the Capri's 1.9 million. But in the early 1970s, during the Capri's golden years and the Mustang's difficult transition period, there were absolutely years when more Capris were sold globally than Mustangs. In Europe specifically, there's no contest, the Capri vastly outsold the Mustang, which was barely sold there at all. The Capri was designed for European conditions and European buyers, and it succeeded brilliantly on its home turf in a way the Mustang never could. So there you have it, 13 facts about the Ford Capri that reveal this car as far more than just Europe's Mustang. It was a phenomenon in its own right. Designed by a talented creator who died tragically young, built in staggering numbers, and loved by drivers across multiple continents. The Capri's story reminds us that the biggest successes come from understanding your market perfectly. Ford took the Mustang formula, ordinary mechanics wrapped in extraordinary styling, and adapted it brilliantly for European tastes. They offered enough variety that everyone could find a Capri that fit their needs, from the humble 1.3-litre economy model to the fire-breathing RS race specials. Today, good Capris are becoming increasingly valuable. RS models command six-figure sums, but even clean standard examples are appreciating as enthusiasts recognize what a special car this was. If you were lucky enough to own one back in the day, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments. What model did you have? What made it special? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Capri's history, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. We've got more forgotten classics and surprising automotive stories coming your way. And if you think your friends would enjoy learning about the car that outsold the Mustang, share this video with them. Thanks for watching. The Ford Capri deserved better recognition then, and it deserves to be remembered now. Until next time, keep those classics on the road.